Hi, Jennifer Warren here. And today I'm going to talk about the news about ExxonMobil potentially buying Pioneer Natural Resources. Um, Now, so far, there's been no formal announcement, and we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. This is not the first time that this has come up. There's been one other time when there was the chance that Exxon could have bought them sometime back, but for whatever reason that didn't happen. But what I'm going to talk about is I sort of have a unique position in this story because I started chronicling the story of Pioneer in the Permian back in 2013. And so I've written many articles about them. I've followed their development. I've interviewed the CEO, Scott Sheffield, on numerous occasions. And it started back in 2005, 2006, when when it was the shale boom, and they were heavily involved in the Barnett Shale and the Eagle Ford Shale. And then in 2008, they actually started pivoting and looking at the Permian. And I have the story that I wrote back in 2013, and I'll share a few quotes because it's really interesting how the tides have turned. But how I got involved in this story even, it was the summer of 2013. I was on a lengthy road trip driving through Texas, like 11 hours from Dallas through the Permian Basin to the south. And so I was driving through the Permian, and at one point, I was noticing all these trucks on the road, and there were signs saying, water for sale, and there was just all this flurry of activity. And I was like, "What? Something is going on here." And at the B&B, I think it was in Fort Davis or something, we were at this McDonald's observatory, and like a astronomy observatory, and at the B&B, they were talking. I was asking, and they were talking about how, you can haul water and make I can't remember if it was 60 or 100K a year, hauling water on the trucks. And this was the beginning, really, of really a ramp up in the Permian. And so, fast forwarding a little bit, so in 2013, this was the cover feature, and I'll show you those covers in a minute. But these are kind of a few quotes worth reading, because it kind of gives you some context about the development of Pioneer in the Permian, and the Permian as one of the biggest contributors to global supply today. So let me just read this a little bit. So again, this is the 2013 article. So Pioneer began focusing on the Permian in 2009, says Sheffield. We had a legacy 900,000 acres that they had purchased from the majors, from the Exxons and the Chevrons back then. They had purchased the majors' acreage in the 80s and 90s because they were using their cash they were wanting to use their cash to fund international operations and deep water opportunities. That's what Pioneer was doing in 2009. But then they started looking at the Permian in 2009, and they said it took 2 to 3 years to analyze the data of thousands of wells before they realized how big the prize was. So that was the big realization of what the opportunity was in the Permian. And then this is also kind of interesting. So this is something I wrote. Ironically, the oil and gas majors such as ExxonMobil, BP, and Shell were not leaders in the unconventional energy miracle. And in 2009, Pioneer was one of the top performing energy stocks in the S&P 500 oil and gas index, even ranking number 6 in the overall S&P during this period. And that was largely because of the role of energy at that point. And they were also at the crux of the shale gas boom. And then the last thing I will note is that this is Sheffield being quoted. this is my article, the rise of the Apaches, Devons, Nobles, Pioneers, and Anadarkos, which resulted from buying the assets of the majors, then allowed the Indies, the independents, to develop their own strategies. Sheffield continues. Firms began finding shale, source rock, while the majors were busy competing globally with Chinese and Indian firms. And then at this point, and this is in 2013, the majors were starting to return back to the US market, noting what was happening with shale. And then something else that's kind of interesting, fast forward. So obviously this set off a lot of activity in the oil and gas sector, and Energy Transfer really also helped develop a lot of the pipeline in the Permian and benefited greatly. But this is really interesting. This is so that 2013 article was part of DCEO's Energy Awards edition. This 2014 was the same. In 2014, DCEO, the magazine which published these articles, started recognizing their energy edition as kind of a marquee edition, knowing that we're really ramping up energy development, and North Texas, because of the Barnett Shale, was really a big beneficiary of it. And so hats off to them for recognizing that and continuing on yearly with an energy edition, energy awards, and recognizing all the oil and gas players. Today, they've moved in full swing into energy transition mode, which really started in earnest, I would say, in 2021. But just a couple of quotes from Kelsey Warren, former CEO of Energy Transfer. So I was asking him, your 2013 acquisition of Trunkline LNG, an LNG import and regasification facility in Lake Charles, Louisiana, gives you the ability to export LNG by around 2019. What role do you expect LNG to play at Energy Transfer? And so this was back in 2014. They had just bought what was an import facility, and now it's been converted to an export facility. It's not quite online yet, but it will be. And so he was just saying, we'd only been able to export natural gas to Canada and Mexico, but now that's, there was a policy reversal. And so he was saying facilities like Lake Charles, makes sense, and there's going to be more built. And then he adds that LNG will be exported. If it's not from the United States, it'll be exported from Argentina, Africa, Trinidad, or Qatar. Billions of dollars of installed infrastructure could then become idle, and he was saying if gas prices went up too high. That was at that point. But then he said, we're so blessed with a ridiculously abundant amount of hydrocarbons in the United States. I believe this will become a big part of our business, transporting gas from all over the country, liquefying it, and putting it on ships primarily bound to Asia. So that's in fact exactly what is happening. And then one other prescient quote of Kelsey Warren's. So I asked him about moving natural gas from the north to the southern states, specifically the Gulf Coast. And, at that time, it's like the Gulf Coast was one of the fastest growing markets in the world. And I asked him to talk about it a little bit. And he just said, given the LNG facilities approved by the Department of Energy, including theirs, together with the petrochem business expansions on the Gulf, natural gas demand could easily be 10 to 12 BCF per day on the Gulf. That, coupled with oversupply from the Northeast, is a pipeliner's dream. You have to repurpose assets from south to north, because we were importing LNG and sending it north, and now it's the opposite way, in ways that were previously not built, to north and south. That sounds like a problem, but it is really an opportunity. And so that tells you, how switched on these oil and gas leaders were, and how prescient they were, and how they saw the opportunities. And it's just an extraordinary story. And then fast forwarding a little bit to 2019, this is Trevor Rees-Jones. He's a private operator, but he is like he dominates, at one point dominated the Marcellus. He was one of the pioneers developing the Marcellus when everybody else was, doing the Barnett Shale and the Eagle Ford Shale. He was up there, doing the Marcellus Shale in Appalachia, and has done quite well for himself. But then the other thing I wanted to talk about, where's the other? There's one other article. Oh yeah, okay. Fast forward to 2021. And so in 2021, this header is Permian Basin King Scott Sheffield, and he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award. And I was, fortunate to get to write the feature. And at that time, they were really looking at net zero and the impact of net zero, the impact of underinvestment, which is finally kind of starting to correct, although we still have high prices, and now we do, because OPEC, is cutting supply, to sort of preempt any possibilities of what any recession could do, if that, in fact, how that manifests. But Scott back then was very prescient in saying, he very much focused on trying to reduce carbon emissions, trying to promote cleaner barrels, trying to clean up the Permian, really led the push, really led the industry. And Pioneer has been rewarded for that. And they're a leader in their ESG ratings. And I think this is partly one of the reasons why ExxonMobil wants to acquire Pioneer. It would greatly enhance, their ESG profile, and it would just also ramp up all the production that they intend in the Permian, because they're producing, I think they're producing like 500,000 barrels a day, I think in 2025, and then they want to go to 1 million after that. I have the numbers here. In 2023, and they went ahead to 1 million barrels a day. Right now, Pioneer is the largest producer in the Permian, and they produce about 360,000 barrels a day. So they're a significant part of the Permian. Back in 2021, they were like 10% of the Permian's production. And the Permian itself, within the global supply chain for oil, is roughly almost 6% now of global supply. And the other thing I just wanted to mention too, aside from the net zero, that Scott Sheffield took seriously, and I think because of him leading the charge, you've had many other oil and gas firms, pledge to reduce carbon emissions. And, they have to do that in order to have that social license to operate, especially in a world where increasingly we're using more renewables. Again, that's more directed at power gen, but in fact, the oil and gas industry is going to be a leader in the energy transition via their competencies, whether it's CCS, some hydrogen, but they're also using renewables to help with electrifying field operations more, so that their carbon emissions profiles are reduced, and so they're producing their product cleaner. And then the other thing I'll note from the 2021 article, where I was really discussing the trends in the Permian, Scott was saying, because at that point in 2021, Ukraine had not happened, and Russia had not, invaded Ukraine. So as we know, we've shifted into this energy security lens more than back then. Back in 2021, it was still very much the low carbon push, exclusively, until those cracks started showing. But what he was saying, in some of the forecasts, that in fact, if in fact we went to net zero, and this is by the IEA's statistics, the Paris-based organization, that we would only be producing like 24 million barrels a day. That's, from 100 million barrels a day where we're at now to 24 million barrels a day by 2050. And if that were the case, the Permian would not be needed. It would just be OPEC. So my other point I wanted to make is that if it were not for the Permian and the U.S. producers, you know, we would be hostage to the price making of OPEC and Russia and others in natural gas. So it is an amazing feat to have the U.S. now in the role it is playing in the oil and gas industry globally. And I think that that is underappreciated in some corners in the United States. And it is it's a big benefactor to our economy and to our position. And our entrepreneurs like George Yates, and he was in the last DCEO article edition, natural gas, doing things to help Europe produce more of their own gas resources, specifically in Spain. He was trying to help the UK, but the UK government hasn't really been helping itself. We'll see how those equations change. But you know, he is trying to help Europe, you know, with technology transfer and capital transfer from the US to help Europe with having more energy security, basically. And the other development I just want to note, and with Exxon's potential purchase of, you know, whether it's Pioneer or another large firm, is that right now with higher prices and with many of the oil and gas firms, large firms, having really good balance sheets, making, you know, good, profitable, being highly profitable with higher oil prices, you know, it's a time where there is likely going to be more consolidation, and that is M&A, and that was talked about back at the Fed conference in November of 2021. An executive from Chase talked about that and talked about the potential for deals. And he was also noting that in the last couple of years, the deal sizes have become quite large. And I don't have that information. It's in that afterthoughts video, and I think there's actually a slide there on it. And even if for some reason, you know, prices go down, you know, to say 70, 75, it's still a time for M&A. I think you're just going to see that consolidation, especially with, you know, how this energy transition looks. You know, oil and gas is going to be around for a very long time. And I think these large firms, given their balance sheets and profitability, it's a really good time for developing more scale, which is a good thing, and helping produce resources more efficiently. And it's going to help with a lot of the acquisition of new technologies that are going to happen as a result of the IRA legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act. And I've talked about that on some of my videos. But so it's kind of an interesting, brave new world. But I think, you know, the US is very much leading the way. And I also had mentioned after attending the SARA conference that in the back rooms that there was a very large and important group that very much recognized US shale, and they were saying, oh, we're all shale now. And so, you know, that makes me kind of think it's an interesting concept, because what shale represents is short cycle oil production. You know, it can come on faster, it can be, you know, slowed down, as opposed to, you know, doing like a lot of big deep water projects that are heavy capital intensive. So that's a little bit indicative, but we'll see where things fall. That is all I have for today, and thank you for your time.